This all occurred 3 months ago during summer break. I still can't believe it. My 35-year-old Uncle Donald, a well-grown, gorgeous man, welcomed me to his apartment during summer vacation. I recalled him from my youth, but we hadn't seen each other in approximately 5 years, and I thought it was a great idea because I was stuck at home. I wish I knew where it would lead me. He's 35, but you wouldn't know it. Handsome and in excellent shape. You can tell he takes care of himself just by looking at his skin and hair. Always on point. Oh man, the way he smells is a combination of fresh fragrance and something uniquely him. Every time we're together, it's as if that aroma lingers, and it drives me insane. So, he asked me to his house for a summer getaway, just the two of us. His residence is just what you would anticipate. He is both elegant and comfortable, with an effortless cool that is uniquely his. I was already feeling a mix of excitement and fear, and I wasn't sure why. So when we arrived at his apartment, the first thing he did was grab me a cold beer classic. Donald, more relaxed and thoughtful, delivered it to me with that easy smile that makes you feel like the only person in the room. He then responded, "I'm gonna go change out of these clothes. Make yourselves at home." I just nodded, trying to remain calm, but inside my heart was racing. I'm not sure why. I'd known him for a long time, but there was something about being in his presence that made everything feel different and more intense. I sat down with my beer, attempting to divert myself by taking in the surroundings. It was simple but elegant. Dark wood floors, a handful of framed photos on the shelf, soft leather furniture, and everything smelled faintly of him. But when I heard his footsteps down the corridor, I followed him without thinking. I can't explain it. It was as if someone drew me up out of that chair and along the corridor. The door to his room wasn't completely closed, and I knew I shouldn't have peeked, but I did, and it was the most intriguing thing I'd ever seen in my life. He was standing back from the entrance, pulling off his shirt. The way his muscles moved beneath his skin was reminiscent of a movie scene. His back was broad and muscular, and you could see every defined line on his shoulders and arms. His skin was tanned and smooth, and I could see how his back muscles contracted as he lifted the shirt over his head and then removed his slacks. I was unprepared for that. His legs were equally toned and powerful, as if he could run a marathon or lift a car, and his ass was hard and muscular, the type of shape that makes your mouth dry. I caught myself biting my lip, and the warmth spread through my body like a slow-burning fire. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I needed to tell myself to breathe. I didn't want to be caught staring, so I turned to leave, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, taking in the sight of him. I knew I shouldn't be there, watching him like this, yet every part of my being was drawn to him. I felt a twist in my gut, a combination of nervousness and want. My hands were sweating, and my mouth was dry. Finally, he completed changing, which brought me back to reality. I turned and virtually rushed back to the living room, attempting to appear casual. I sat there, sipping my beer, hoping to calm my beating heart. I kept seeing him standing there, utterly at ease and ignorant of his influence on me. It was the most intense sensation I'd ever experienced, and I had no idea what was going to happen next. I was still trying to calm myself when he returned to the living room, dressed in a white t-shirt and loose gray shorts. Simple, but God, he looked like he belonged on the cover of a magazine. His hair was still slightly damp, and his aroma hit me again, stronger this time, fresh and clean with a tinge of something I couldn't quite place, but knew I'd never forget. He fell down on the couch next to me, his body close enough for me to feel the warmth emanating from him. He took a long swallow of his beer and leaned back, releasing a quiet, satisfied sigh. "Man, it's been a week," he grumbled to himself. "Work has been crazy. I'm exhausted." He gave me a tiny, exhausted smile. "I suppose I'm going to take a nap. Hope that's cool." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course you deserve it." He closed his eyes and leaned back into the couch, one arm draped casually over the backrest, his legs spread wide in that effortless, confident way some guys have. I tried to focus on the beer in my hand, but my eyes kept drifting back to him. The way his t-shirt stretched across his chest, the way his jaw relaxed as he started to unwind. There was something so raw about seeing him like that, unguarded and vulnerable. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the beer. Maybe it was the weeks of tension building up. All the things I'd felt but never said. Whatever it was, I stood up, set my beer down, and walked over to him. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. He didn't open his eyes as I approached, and for a second I almost chickened out, but then, without really thinking about it, I stepped behind the couch and placed my hands on his shoulders. He tensed for a split second, then relaxed, letting out another sigh. "Damn," he murmured, his voice low and rough. "That feels less good." I started to knead his shoulders, feeling the tension in the muscles beneath my hands. His skin was warm, his shoulders broad and firm, and I could feel the stress slip away as I touched him, his breathing slowing and easing. I stroked my hands down to the base of his neck and back up, releasing the knots. I'm not sure how long I did it, but I could feel him sliding deeper into the couch, his head leaning forward. I raised my hands up to the back of his neck and stroked my fingers through his hair, allowing them to rest at the base of his skull. He made a low sound, almost a sigh, that I swear went straight through me. My entire body was on edge, and my skin tingled. I leaned forward, my heart pounding, and touched my lips softly against his cheek, just to test the waters. He did not pull away, nor did he open his eyes, so I kissed him again, this time on the corner of his jaw. My lips brushed against the scratchy, heated stubble. I moved up. I pressed a kiss just beneath his ear, then down to his neck. His skin was hot under my lips, and I could feel his pulse throbbing there. I was on fire. Every nerve in my body was firing, waiting for his response. I wasn't sure whether he'd push me away, laugh it off, or order me to stop, but then he reached up and put his hand into my hair, fingers curling around the back of my head. He didn't say anything, didn't open his eyes. He simply held me there, his hold hard yet gentle. I kept kissing his neck, moving slowly and tasting the salt on his skin. His breathing became deeper, and I could feel his chest rise and fall. His other hand reached up and rested on my hip, his fingers pressing in just enough to make my head spin. I had no idea what was happening or where this was leading. All I knew was that I did not want to stop. His hand remained on the back of my head, fingers firmly in my hair, guiding but not forcing me. I kept kissing his neck and feeling his pulse beneath my lips. Each beat drew me deeper into the blur of want. His skin felt warm, nearly scorching, and he inhaled slowly and deeply. Control made me desire him even more. I moved around the couch, standing in front of him now, his eyes still closed and his head back, but he had a tiny smirk on his lips, as if he knew what was going on. I could not handle it anymore. I straddled him and settled on his knees. My hands lay on his chest, and his eyes finally opened, locking onto mine with an expression I can't describe. It was as if he saw everything I was feeling and wanting, and it reflected exactly how he felt. I leaned forward, our faces only inches apart, and I could feel his breath on my lips. The air between us was electric, so charged that I couldn't think. Then he closed the space and pressed his lips against mine. It wasn't kind or hesitant. It was hungry and demanding. His lips slid against mine, as if he had been yearning for this moment for as long as I had. Our tongues connected, and the world simply vanished. I pushed my hands under his t-shirt and felt the firm planes of his abs. His muscles stiffened under my touch, and I couldn't help but trace my fingers over every inch of his body. He extended his arms, and I slid his shirt over his head, tossing it aside. The sight of him shirtless, breathing rapidly, eyes black with need, was nearly too much. His chest was large and defined, with each muscle flawlessly molded. I stroked my fingertips down his body, across the ridges of his abs, feeling the strength beneath his skin. His hands gripped my waist, fingers pressing in as he drew me closer. I could feel the heat from his body through my clothes, and every area we touched sent sparks through me. I leaned down, kissing his jaw, neck, and collarbone. He tilted his head back, making a low, rumbling sound that made my entire body shudder. I kissed my way down his chest, tasting the salt on his skin, and felt his muscles spasm and relax beneath my lips. At some time, my shirt was on the floor, and his hands brushed over my exposed flesh, powerful and sure. leaving a path of heat wherever they touched. He leaned forward, his lips on my neck, his fangs caressing the delicate skin there. I couldn't stop the faint groan that came from my lips, and he replied by pressing me further closer, his hands clutching my hips. I slid down from his lap and knelt between his legs. I looked up at him, and he was looking at me with such intensity that it made my heart accelerate. I'm not going to go into too much detail here. You can fill in the blanks, but let me just say that the sounds he made, those low, breathless gasps, were the sweetest I'd ever heard. His head dropped back against the couch, his hands in my hair, his body tensing and releasing under my touch, and I was at a level I had never experienced before. I was so immersed in the moment that I forgot I was doing this. To my goddamned uncle. Not a man, but an uncle. I am writing this now, and I'm a little surprised. When he drew me back, his eyes were the darkest I had ever seen them. He stood up, took my hand, and guided me to the couch. He forced me down, his body enveloping mine, his weight firm and soothing. His hands were constantly stroking, pressing, and exploring, and I couldn't get enough of him. It was strong and raw. I will not lie, it stung at first. He's, let's say, not little, yet there was something about the way he held me, the way his hands went over my skin, that made me feel comfortable and protected. He was strong, yes, but he was also cautious, as if he understood just how to walk the line between pleasure and agony. The discomfort dissipated over time, giving way to an overpowering surge of pleasure, his rhythm, and his touch. It was as if he understood my body better than I did. I felt goosebumps with every movement and thrust. His hand seized my hips, directing me, and I could feel the power in them, the way they held me firmly but not harshly, the sounds he made, God, I can still hear them, low, deep, almost primal. He was not simply going through the motions. He was utterly immersed, lost in the moment, and I was right there with him. It wasn't simply physical. It went beyond that. There was a connection, an intensity, as if we were both revealing all. We moved together, our bodies completely in harmony. The world beyond that room did not exist. There was only us and this. Every touch, kiss, and breath felt electrified. It grew and heightened the tension between us until I felt like I was about to blow. We were still entwined together on the couch. As we caught our breath, the room was dense with the post-intimacy haze. I could feel the heat coming from his body, and his chest crushed against mine, firm and comfortable. There was a sense of protection, as if his warmth was more than just physical. It wrapped around me and kept me in place. His arms were still around me, strong and firm, and I could feel his heartbeat slowing to meet mine. Then he shifted slightly, leaning up just enough to place his body against my back. He wrapped his arms around my waist. He pulled me closer, and I melted into him. His body temperature was extreme, almost scorching, but in the greatest manner. Every inch of me felt connected to him, as if I were a part of something greater than myself. He leaned forward, his breath warm on my neck. I felt his lips, soft and careful, brushing small kisses against my shoulder. He did not rush. Each kiss was leisurely and lengthy, as if he was enjoying the moment. I could feel his jaw stubble brushing against my flesh, which contrasted with the softness of his lips. It caused shivers down my spine. Then he did something that made my entire body weak. He buried his face in the crook of my neck and simply breathed me in. It wasn't simply a kiss or a touch, but something more. I could feel him inhaling deeply, as if he was attempting to memorize my aroma and absorb a piece of me into himself. His breath felt hot against my skin, and when he exhaled, a wave of chills passed over me. He kissed my neck again, slowly this time, his lips sliding up to my ear. The way he moved and held me was possessive and gentle, as if he was claiming me while simultaneously protecting me. His fingertips moved across my tummy, tracing slow circles on my flesh. Each contact was electric, sending thrills through me and making me hyper-aware of every area where our bodies met. I fell back into him, laying my head on his shoulder, and he tightened his arms around me. I felt rooted, as if I could let go of everything and simply be in that moment with him. The warmth of his body flowed into mine, and I could feel his chest rising and falling on my back. He nuzzled his face into my neck again, planting a sweet kiss just beneath my ear. He murmured, barely audible, "You drive me crazy." I got a pleasure from the way he stated it, as if it was something he couldn't control. I tilted my head slightly, and our noses brushed. His eyes were dark and penetrating, and he appeared to be looking straight through me. He put his forehead against mine, his breath mingling with mine, and for a time we simply stayed there, no words, no movement, just being before he kissed. He kissed me again, softly and slowly, as if he was trying to express everything he couldn't say in that single kiss. His hand slid up my sides, tracing every curve and contour. It wasn't just physical. He seemed to be memorizing and learning me. His fingers glided across my ribs, up to my shoulders, and back down, each contact sending waves of heat through me. I couldn't help smiling. I felt a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the physical heat. I turned to face him, and he drew me onto his lap, his arms still wrapped around me, his hands stretched across my back, keeping me close as if he couldn't bear the thought of any distance between us. I believe he forgot at some point that I had his humorous items. When it was all over, I found myself lying on his chest, his muscular arms around me, holding me tight. The room was silent. The only sounds were slow breaths and the slight ruffle of the breeze outside the window. His skin was warm beneath me, his heartbeat a constant, soothing cadence against my ear. The rise and fall of his chest felt like an anchor, tying me to a moment I never wanted to leave. His fingers stroked soft patterns through my hair, moving gently and seemingly unconsciously, but each stroke sent a relaxing wave through me. There was something extremely intimate about it, something beyond the physical connection we had just made. It felt like he was attempting to console, reassure, or perhaps convince himself. His touch was gentle and delicate, as if he was frightened I'd slide away if he let go. We lay there silently for a while, wrapped in each other, our bodies' heat mingled to form a cocoon of warmth and protection. I could feel the tension slowly leaving him, his muscles softening beneath me. But there was also something else, a heaviness, an unspoken burden. His fingers in my hair paused, and I could feel the change in his breathing, the way it deepened as if he was gathering his thoughts. Finally, he exhaled, and the weight of it was palpable. His chest rose and fell beneath me, and I could feel the tension coiling. A different kind of person appeared in him again. This time, there was a tightness, a sense of restraint, as if he was holding something back. The warmth that had been so comfortable a moment before was suddenly brittle, as if it could shatter with the slightest word. I could tell he was trying to find a way to express or defend something he couldn't quite define. The way his hand paused in response to his body's small shift beneath mine conveyed regret. I could sense his apologies before he said it, a nonverbal plea for understanding. It was evident in the way his fingers remained motionless in my hair and his breath caught for a brief second. I didn't need to hear the words to know what he was going to say. It was wrong, and we shouldn't have let things get that far. I could feel the weight of it crushing down on him as shame crept in around the edges. Even as he held me tight, he seemed to be attempting to separate himself from me, but I wasn't going to let him. I shifted slightly, just enough to meet his stare, and I saw it. The battle, the war he was having with himself. His eyes were dark, anxious, and full of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. There was remorse, undoubtedly, but there was also a need, a vulnerability that he was attempting to conceal. I reached up, my fingers following the contour of his jaw, the stubble scratchy. I could feel the strain beneath my touch, the way he tightened his teeth and held back words he felt compelled to utter. There was a moment of silence, a pause where everything hung in the balance, the weight of the moment pressing down on both of us. And then I did what felt natural. I placed my finger gently against his lips, silencing the words before they could spill out. I didn't need to hear them. I didn't want to. This wasn't something to apologize for or something to regret. This was something real, something we both needed, and I wasn't going to let him rewrite it. I looked into his eyes. I'd started this. I'd made the initial move, and I had no regrets. I rested my hand against his cheek, my thumb lightly stroking across his skin. There was no place for regrets here. I informed him quietly that only actions could express that this was also mine, and that I was equally responsible for what had transpired. This was not a mistake. It was something I had chosen and wanted. That night, we fell asleep wrapped in one another's arms on the couch. When I awoke the next morning, I couldn't remember everything that had happened. My mind was foggy, caught between sleep and reality, and it took me a few seconds to clear the fog. I remembered everything that happened yesterday, and I had a strong desire. Usually, you don't feel like it in the morning, but this time was different. I wanted him to meet me. I believe you understand. I stood up, the floor chilly beneath my bare feet, and moved toward the kitchen. There was something so intimate about seeing him like that in the early morning doing something as simple as making breakfast. It seemed homey without even thinking about it. I came up behind him, wrapped my arms around his waist, and rested my cheek against his back. His skin felt warm and substantial, and I could sense the rhythm of his breathing. He stopped for a time, his muscles tensing under my touch, before taking a long, trembling breath and relaxing somewhat against me. He did not turn around. He simply continued stirring the eggs, though his actions were slower and more methodical. I could feel him tense, but not in a pleasant way. It was tentative and uncertain. It was evident in the way his shoulders tensed and his breath hitched. He sighed low and deep, and I could sense the conflict in it, as if he was attempting to gather his thoughts before putting something complicated into words. When he finally spoke, his voice was hushed, as if he were speaking to himself. He began to say that it was bad, and that we shouldn't have allowed things to get so far. He enjoyed it, but I did not let him finish. I reached up and gently turned him to face me. His eyes were disturbed, with a torrent of emotions swirling behind them. Guilt, possibly confusion. But there was also something more, a kind of desire, a vulnerability he was attempting to conceal. I could see and feel it in the way his hands hung at his sides, as if he had no idea what to do with them. I did not need to hear the remainder of his statements. I knew exactly what he was going to say. We crossed a line, which was a mistake. We shouldn't have allowed that to happen, but I didn't believe that for a second. I had no regrets, no second-guessing. This was real. It was ours. I gazed up at him, holding his gaze for a while, allowing the quiet to express what I couldn't, then went to my knees in front of him, not losing eye contact. Gathering my hair and placing my hands lightly on his hips, I could feel a shift in him, the way his breath caught, the way his entire body stilled. The tension in the air was heavy and electric, but different now. The eggs were somewhat burned, but none of us minded. He was leaning against the bar counter, and I did what I could. A minute later, I was leaning on the kitchen bar counter, the cool surface pressing against my palms while I took in my surroundings. The air still had a fresh morning quality to it, but the warmth between us was palpable. I could feel his presence behind me, close enough to make my heartbeat quicken, but there was also a strange comfort in it, as if nothing else mattered but this moment, this feeling. His body was just inches from mine, and I could sense his steady warmth, his solid form a reassuring presence that made me feel safe and grounded. I felt his warm, steady breath against the back of my neck, which sent a lovely tingle down my spine. It was one of those moments when everything around you fades away, leaving only you and the person next to you, as if time slows down. His hands then caressed my shoulders, a soft but purposeful touch, his fingertips gently pressing into my flesh, sending a slight wave of warmth through me. His hands stroked over me in a reassuring and anchoring way, and I felt myself almost leaning into him. One hand instinctively moved down to my waist, and I could feel his enormous, warm palm resting lightly on my side. There was a subtle pressure there, a reminder of how genuine this was, how linked we were in that instant. I had never understood how much I craved this kind of closeness until now. The sensation of someone's body, so near to mine, the heat emanating from him, the way his hands moved with such purpose, as if he was attempting to transmit something without words. I could feel his fingers lightly caressing the strands of my hair, which was the softest, most calming sensation. His touch was kind, yet there was also power there, a solidity that made me feel as if I could lean into him without falling. His breathing behind me was slow and steady, as if he was enjoying the moment as much as I was. Each exhalation seemed like a quiet reassurance, a small promise that whatever was going on between us did not have to end. I could feel the way his chest moved with each breath, and there was something incredibly intimate about how we fit together in that space. No words were required, just the rhythm of our bodies. It felt natural and effortless, but it was also intense, like every part of me was tuned into him. His hands slid from my shoulders down my waist, bringing me closer to him, and I could feel the warmth of his body radiating against me. There was a soft weight of his body behind mine, and it felt anchoring in a manner that made everything else seem distant, almost as if we were in our own world, cut off from everyone else. I did not want this feeling to end. There was something about it that made everything else seem insignificant. The kitchen mess, the passage of time, even the outside world. All that mattered was this connection, this basic yet profound closeness. His hands, the way they slid over me with such care, the way his breath fell in time with mine, it was all enough to make me believe that this was precisely where I was intended to be. Nothing else mattered. There was no need to communicate, no need for anything else, just the silence of the kitchen, the morning light flooding in, and his constant presence, his hands on me, his body near to mine. I wanted to remember this moment, this feeling, because it was one of those rare occasions when everything clicked, when I felt seen, heard, and understood without having to explain anything. Just a simple, unspoken connection that felt like it had been there all along, waiting for the right time to emerge. And in that moment, all I needed was his hands, his breath, and his presence. It was everything. The next several days passed swiftly, and I didn't want them to end because it seemed so simple and natural between us. It wasn't anything outrageous or dramatic. It was just us being around each other and enjoying the time together. We didn't say much about what had happened or where things were going. We simply remained in that zone for a while. It felt fantastic, but I knew it was going to stop. I started thinking about going, and I realized how much I didn't want to go. I'd gotten used to being there with him, waking up next to him, the comfort of having him around, and the prospect of returning. Returning to my usual routine without any of that seemed strange. It wasn't just about the physical connection. It was about the entire experience, closeness. The quiet moments we just fit together. We didn't talk about what was going on between us, which may have made things easier. It was as if we both understood it was only fleeting, something for us to enjoy in the moment. No pressure, no expectations. We were just enjoying what we had for as long as it lasted. It's autumn now, and I'm waiting for my next chance to see him. I'm already looking forward to it, even though I know it won't change anything, since I remember those days, the connection we had, and how amazing it felt. It was the best experience I've ever had, and I wouldn't trade it for anything as near, intense, and memorable. So we continue to text from time to time. We don't talk about it often, but every now and then we'll post images and snatches from our lives. I send him photographs of nature, just to keep the relationship going, but I can't help but feel frustrated. We both understand that we cannot be open about it. We can't go out in public or be seen together. It's an unusual level of closeness with my real uncle.